You're going to learn Hilchot Beis Abchira in the take from Yemei Ben Metzorim. Eichad the Yeroi from Rebbe Gem Zdoke, Yishas Milon Beis Abchira. And Homer Hein Tachoshun Yoman, von der Choshun Mechanchim in unserer Kehila, Rav Chosid, Rav Chaim, הכהן, טייטלביום, is learning Haloche. Feel all the morning, just tell everybody that in Mitzvah right after Ma'ariv there will be a siyum on Hilchot Zmanim, Sefer Zmanim, and a call of Noshim. Everybody's the siyum will be right after Ma'ariv, and after this will be a Fabringen and Asudas. Everybody should say. I'm Bor, bevakasha.
Alright, we're going to talk about the Amma Traxin, the Amma that divided between the Kodesh HaKadoshim and the Kodesh in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, there's a lot of sveikes about this section. It's a very confusing part of the Beis HaMikdash, and this is a topic that the more you learn about it, the more confusing it gets. So we're going to hopefully clarify a bit about how this Amma Traxin works, and if we don't clarify it, at least we'll get clarity that that's very confusing. The point is as follows. There's a Gemara that begins, in Gemara Yuma describes, Mishnayos Yuma describes the way of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, and it says how he would walk holding the pan with the coals, and he was holding the spoon which had in it the spices, and he was walking in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Describes how he would walk in between these two curtains, and through that he would enter into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and do his Avodah. So when the Gemara begins to comment on this Mishnah, the Gemara first of all says, what are these two curtains all about? And the Gemara explains how really at first, in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash, there was a wall there. And then in the second Beis HaMikdash, there was a suffix. They weren't sure, and therefore they made two curtains. So we need to clarify what exactly was their suffix, and how did the two curtains, why is that the only solution that they had available? Again, why do we need to have, what was their suffix, and then why were these two curtains the solution? So the Gemara says over here, Amma Traxin lo yichriu by chachamim ikal afnim ikal achutz. They weren't sure whether this Amma Traxin, the Amma which this wall was built in, was supposed to be considered part of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, or whether it was supposed to be with the Kedusha of the Kodesh. So Ravina has a difficulty with this whole doubt. He says, Maskef for Ravina, my time. What's the reason for this suffix? If it's because one pasuk it says that the Kodesh HaKadoshim should be 20 amas by 20 amas, and another pasuk it says that the Kodesh has to be 40 amas by 20 amas, and you're not sure where to put the Amma Traxin, he says, I have a great solution. It's very possible, it actually must be, that these two measurements are complete, and the Amma Traxin is an additional Amma added in between. Like it's a clear Mishnah, and the Mishnah says the Beis HaMikdash was 100 amas by 100 amas, and 100 amas tall, and it goes through saying the thickness of each wall, and the thickness of the ulam, and the thickness of the heichal, and the thickness of the Kodesh, and then it adds an Amma for the Amma Traxin, and another 20 amas to Kodesh HaKadoshim. Clearly, from the beginning of the Kodesh until the end of the Kodesh HaKadoshim was a total of 61 amas. 40 amas long for the Kodesh, 1 amma for the in-between space, an additional 20 amas for the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So Ravina is asking, what's your doubt about exactly? And he concludes the doubt isn't where this amma should be, the doubt is what Kedusha does it have. If its Kedusha is like an additional amma to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, it's a 21st amma of the holiness of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, or it's an additional 41st amma which is added to the Kodesh. So again, the suffix is not about where to put this Amma. The suffix they had in the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, the suffix that they had in the times of the Beis HaMikdash was only what Kedusha did this Amma have. That's the conclusion of the Gemara the way it's in Bavli. Now, the question that we can ask on this suffix is, what was their need for it to have two curtains? What would be the problem with just, if they know exactly where the location is, just like they built the wall in the first Beis HaMikdash, they should build the wall again in the second Beis HaMikdash. Okay, we're not sure what the Kedusha is of that space, that's fine. We'll build a wall, but we won't do anything in that space anyways. Just build the same wall that they had in the first Beis HaMikdash. So this is something which I think is commonly people have a mistake about. People think because there was a suffix, that's why they had two curtains. The truth of the matter is, the reason they had curtains was for an entirely different reason. The first Beis HaMikdash, the rooms were 30 ames tall. And the architects at the time knew that if you build a wall out of stone, and it's 1 amma thick, it could hold itself if it's 30 amas tall. The second Beis HaMikdash was bigger than the first Beis HaMikdash, and the height was, it says mem amma, and many Girsayis say mea amma, but the accepted way they're supposed to learn is supposed to be only mem, like 40 amas. It was an additional 10 amas taller, and it's impossible to get an amma thick wall to stand 40 amas and stay safe without falling over. So they had no choice, they had to find an alternative. A wall wouldn't work. So they had to make a curtain. So again, the curtain had nothing to do with them not being sure. The Taka had a suffix what type of kedusha it had, but the reason they had curtains instead of a wall was because the height of the second Beis Hamikdash was taller than the height of the first Beis Hamikdash. So the question now is, why did they need two curtains?
There were other walls around the Kodesh Kodashim, around the Kodesh. How did they start?
They could have been much thicker than one amma. This amma was an amma traction. It couldn't have been made thicker than one amma. So it comes the question: why did they have two curtains? Why not one? Just make one curtain in the middle. And if you're going to say that the problem is the curtain has to be separating between the kedusha of the Kodesh Kodashim and the kedusha of the Kodesh, make a thick curtain, the thickness of an amma. This is a question Taisus asked on the Gemara in Yuma. Make one big thick curtain. If it's a architectural problem that you can't build an amma wall, an amma thick wall 40 amas tall, you definitely could make an amma thick curtain that goes 40 amas tall and hanging from the top. So Taisus says that the objective of this separation was to make a division between the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKodashim, and the curtain had to be, just like it was in the Mishkan, the outer layer of the curtain would be where the Kodesh is. The thickness of the curtain itself has to be in the holiness of the Kodesh HaKodashim. Since they weren't sure where that holiness began, they couldn't make the curtain the whole thickness because they might have gotten it wrong. If the Kedusha of the Kodesh HaKodashim starts after this Amma, and the Kodesh is 41 Amas and the Kodesh HaKodashim is exactly 20, then what happened is that they'll have the whole thickness of the curtain in the Kodesh, which that's not allowed. It has to be in the holiness of the Kodesh HaKodashim. So the only solution that we had was to make two curtains, one on either side. So like that, regardless of where the Kedusha of the Kodesh HaKodashim begins, there you have the Mechitza that's separating between that holiness and the holiness of the Kodesh. So this all is the way the Gemara with the Taisus and that basically the whole thing should be clear. The problem is when you come into the Rambam, everything gets turned upside down. The Rambam is very famous. If you don't know the Gemara beforehand, the Rambam is also pretty simple to understand. But when you already know the Gemara and you know that there was no suffix where this Amma was, and you also know that there was no problem building, there was no, the suffix didn't cause them to build the wall. The wall was not built in the same as Mikdash because of a technical problem. That was difficult to build something so high. Now let's try to learn the Rambam and see what the Rambam says. The Rambam says as follows: yeah, there was a wall built in the times of the first Beis Hamikdash. Kivin Shabanu Abayis Sheini Nistapek Lahem. It says when they were building the second Beis Hamikdash had a doubt. Im Oivi Akeisel Haya Mimidas HaKedash. If it was part of the measurement of the place of the Beis Hamikdash that was Kedash, or Mimidas Kedash HaKadashim, which means they didn't know where to build the wall. Lefichach Asu Kedash HaKadashim Avye Esrim Amma. They made a full 20 Amas for the Kedash HaKadashim. Also a Kedash Arboim Amma Tmim. They said full 40 Amas for the Kedash. V'nichu Amma Yisera, and they added an extra Amma. V'nichu Amma Yisera between the Kedash and the Kedash HaKadashim. And they didn't build a wall like in the second Beis Hamikdash. Ela also Shnei Pareches. They made two curtains, one on the side of Kedash HaKadashim, one on the side of the Kedash, and the Amma between. And this was instead of the Amma, the wall in the first Beis Hamikdash. So the Taisus clearly says, first of all, it wasn't just a suffix about the Kedusha. He said they didn't know where to build it. Now the Gemara clearly objected that. The Gemara says, Maske Floravina, and it says maybe that both of the rooms were full 20 and full 40 amas, and they had additional amma added for a wall. And that's the Gemara's conclusion. According to the Rambam, the first Beis Hamikdash had a 60 amma total from the beginning of the Kodesh till the end of the Kodesh HaKodashim. And the Amma wall was either removing a Amma off the Kodesh HaKodashim, which means the Kodesh HaKodashim would be only 19 Ammas, and then that wall was the last Amma of it, or possibly the last Amma of the Kodesh was the wall. But there was a 60 Ammas total. There's no additional space for the wall. When it came time for the second Beis Hamikdash, they didn't know where to build the wall. Or at that time they couldn't build a wall because it was much taller. But they didn't know where to put the curtains that would be in place of the wall. Should have gone in the Kodesh or in the Kodesh HaKodashim. Because of the doubt, they restructured the whole Beis Hamikdash. They added an Amma to it. Hinichu Ami Yisera, and now it became 61 Ammas, which is a big change from the way it was in times of the first Beis Hamikdash. So the question is, where does Rambam get this from? It's not from the Gemara Bavli for sure, not because that's not the Maskana of the Bavli. So the Kesef Mishnah on the Rambam right away notices that issue. Other Mefarshim try to fetch that he does look at the Bavli. The Kesef Mishnah says he's based on Yerushalmi. It's a whole different marker. And the Yerushalmi is in Masechta Kalayim. In Masechta Kalayim, which is breeding two different types of plants together, there are certain types of plants which are a suffix whether they're a tree or a vegetable, whether they're fruit or a vegetable. Certain plants that are a suffix whether they're a grain or a vegetable. And it goes to the Shisha Sveikis. And it goes to the Sveikis throughout all these different things. And then the last through, there's a Sveikis by animals as well. I don't know how to pronounce it, a Kvi or a Kai. A certain animal which is a suffix Chai, a suffix Behema. There's a suffix amongst people between an Isha and an Isha, which is an androgynous. And then the last suffix that's mentioned in Yerushalmi is Amatraxin. Because it was a suffix whether it's Kodesh or Kodesh HaKodashim. And then the Gemara says, my Traxin, and this is what the Yerushalmi says. What's the Amatraxin all about? So Traxin there comes from a combination of two Yevani words. One means track, somehow means pnim, and sin somehow means chutz. I'm not sure exactly how. One means inside and outside, and this was the dividing area between the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and it was a suffix. Why was it a suffix? It goes on to say, Psukim, one pasuk says that the Kodesh HaKadoshim was 20 amas, meaning that this wall was outside of it. It was outside the Kodesh HaKadoshim. No, it says that the Kodesh was 40 amas, and therefore it was a suffix where the Kedusha was. Now, in the Yerushalmi, it doesn't come to the conclusion, it doesn't have Ravina's question and proof that there was 61 amas total and there's an additional amma added for the Amatraxin. In the Babli, it just stops the sugya right there and it moves on ahead. According to the Kesef Mishnah, the Rambam, based on that Yerushalmi, learns that there was no additional amma, and the Chachamim, because of the suffix, added it, not based on the way it originally was. Now, obviously, to say this, for the Rambam to say such a thing is really complicated, because if in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash, there was a wall, and in the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, they had to replace it with a curtain, for technical reasons, and the entire space of the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim was exactly 60 amas, they could have just made that one curtain exactly in between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. There's no need for a wall. One curtain would have solved the problem. The curtain would be exactly in that area. He knows exactly where the Kedusha of the Kodesh HaKadoshim ends, exactly where the Kedusha of the Kodesh begins. Make like one curtain in between, you're done. Why is there a need for two curtains according to Taisus? And the second of all, anyone which wants to add, if you have a building, you want in the middle of nowhere, add an extra foot in the middle of a building, it completely messes up the entire structure. We know that the Beis HaMikdash was built, well, the way it's written in the Pasuk, Hakol, Mi, Yad, Hashem, Olai, His skill, everything was exact, and according to the way Hashem said, how could the Chachamim, because of a suffix, suddenly change around the whole dimensions and the whole structure of the Beis HaMikdash? Because they weren't sure. Like, first of all, you have a solution just putting one curtain exactly in the center. And second of all, again, he had no suffix about where the what's it called? He only had a suffix about which side of on the end of the Kodesh HaKadoshim or the end of the Kodesh wall should be. But they knew exactly where the holiness of the Kodesh HaKadoshim ended, and they knew exactly where the holiness of the Kodesh started. So they could have just put that little curtain right in between. Second thing is, once you're adding space, they could have added the amma and a half and built a wall like they did in the first Beis HaMikdash. Once you're adding, why only one amma and then have to put curtains? If you could just add an amma and a half. Anyhow, so to answer this Rambam, Deva says, what's the objective of this amma? So if you look back in the Mishkan, it says the the purpose was to make a mechitza between the kedusha of the Kodesh HaKadoshim and the Kodesh. Another reason brought in Psukim, it says that the pareiches is called pareiches hamasach, and it says in another pasuk that the pareiches was there. It would be v'sachta al ha'arin es ha'pareiches, that it would be like a hagana. Rashi explains it would be a protection, a way to enclose and to lock off the Kodesh HaKadoshim from the rest of the world. So again, either it's a mechitza, this is the way the Yerushalmi translated the word traxin, that it was pnim and chutz. Another possibility is the way Taisus learns the word traxin means. Trak, he says, means Trukugali means a sort of mechitza. Sin means Sinai, which is referring to the luchos. Traxin means something that protected the luchos, that was covering the luchos that was given to us on our Sinai. That's the second objective, both based on Psukim. The Rebbe says, according to the Rambam, the purpose of the curtains in the second Beis HaMikdash were from neither of the was made. I handed both of these things to it, but it wasn't specially for that. It was for a third reason. The purpose of it was as follows. It says in the Pasuk regarding Shlomo Melech. When Shlomo Melech built the first Beis HaMikdash, it says that he made as Beis Hashem, and he made. Just a second. It says in the pasuk regarding in Malachim Aleph, Vayihi kechlois Shlomo livnei as Beis Hashem as Beis Hamelech. Beis Hashem and Beis Hamelech. The Zohar explains Beis Hashem refers to the Azares, the Lishkos, the Ulam, and the Dvir. Those are the four places. As Beis Hashem, that's the Kodesh HaKadosh. Alright, so that means that we have four sections. The Azaris and the Lishkos on the outer side of the Beis HaMikdash. The Ulam is like the Kodesh. What is the Dvir? So the Dvir is the space that the Amatraxin, the space separating between Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim. According to the Rambam, this is a section of the Beis HaMikdash. Just like the Kodesh was a part of the Beis HaMikdash, so too the Amatraxin was a whole section of the Beis HaMikdash that was built. Equal, according to the Lishkos, to the Azaris. The Amatraxin has a name on its own, it's a section on its own, and it has to be in the Beis HaMikdash. You cannot cancel that. If you would put a curtain instead of a wall, the curtain takes no space. You would be canceling a whole special section of the Beis HaMikdash. What was the reason for this? It says that in the times of the Mishkan, everything was temporary. In the times of the Beis HaMikdash, everything was done permanently. And the Mishkan was good enough to have a curtain separating between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, since it was a Kedusha Kavua and Mokim, therefore you had to have a hefsek of Mokim, a separation of space between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So again, it doesn't matter if it's a curtain, it doesn't matter if it's a wall. What matters most is that there should be a Amma space separating between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. If you don't have that space, then the objective will not be there, and it will be missing into what the Beis HaMikdash needs. Now, based on this, we understand why there have to be two curtains, and between the two curtains there have to be an amma. That was sort of like a memutza, a medium space where you prepare yourself to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. An example for this would be from the Ulam. In the Mishkan there was no Ulam in front of the Kodesh. When they built the Beis HaMikdash, there was a whole other room added. Although generally the Mishkan was like a miniature Beis HaMikdash, but we see the word changes. And these changes are because they're going from a temporary Kedusha to a permanent Kedusha. So again, therefore the separations between one level of Kedusha and the next have to be stronger and more felt. Therefore now a Pareiches is not good enough. It's necessary to have a space of an Amma separating. So now, according to the Rambam, it turns out, even if they would know exactly where the Amma Traxin was built in the first Beis HaMikdash, they would know, let's say for example, that was for sure in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. When it would come time to the second Beis HaMikdash and they add 10 Amas to the height of the Beis HaMikdash and they could no longer build a wall there, they would still need two curtains there. Even though they know exactly where the Kedusha is. Because they have to separate this section of the Beis HaMikdash and designate it as the Dvir. This is the Memutza area. And also it explains why when the Kohen Gadol entered the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Mishnah describes that length, how he'd walk in between these two curtains. While he was there, he was neither in the Kodesh nor in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. This was a hefsek, a pausing space, where he transitioned between one and the other. Now, in Zayar it says that the Zayar was one of the places that calls this area with a name of its own, and that's where the Rebbe pretty much bases this explanation. The Rambam holds it's a separate section of the Beis HaMikdash, and the Rebbe says that according to Rebbe Leivik's Ha'ara on it, we can explain you can clarify what the Zayar means, which otherwise would be very difficult to understand. The Zayar clearly, the pasuk says that Shlomo finished building Beis Hashem and Beis HaMalach. The Beis Hashem refers to those four sections: the Lishkes Hazaris, the Heichel, the Ulam, and the Dvir. And then comes the Kodesh HaKadoshim separately. So it seems like the Dvir is together with the rest of the Beis HaMikdash, and the Kodesh HaKadoshim is separate. It seems like from the Zayar that the Amma Traxin have the Kedusha of the Kodesh. It's a lower level of Kedusha. The Rebbe Leivik adds that these four sections of the Beis HaMikdash correspond to the four letters of Hashem's name: Yud, Kei, Vav, Kei. And this Dvir is the highest level. It's the Yud of Shem Havayim. The Rebbe says, if you understand according to Chassidus what the Yud is, it says in the Agam Perak Lamed Hey that the only sphere where Aaron Tov is able to come into is the Chachma. Because Chachma is Koyach Ma'at Spitzel, and that's a kli for the infinite light of Hashem. Based on this, you understand that this Amma Traxin was similar to the letter Yud of Hashem's name. Just like Begashmis, it's a memutza between the Kodesh, HaKadoshim, and the rest of the world. So too, the letter Yud is a memutza between Aaron Tov, the way it is higher than Tzimtzum, and Hishtal. And he says, just like Aaron Tov is found in Chachma, so too the Kedusha of the Kodesh HaKadoshim is found in this Amma Traxin as well. And therefore, according to the Zayar, the Rebbe concludes, there was never a suffix either about the Kedusha. Everything is clear in where it was, and they also know what Kedusha it had. It definitely had the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash, of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Anyhow, the Yisrael Shalom, that we should be zeichet to see the Binyan Beis HaMikdash Shlishi take it from Yad.
Just to remind everybody that right after Ma'ariv, in Mitzvah Shem, there will be a siyum on Sefer Zmanim and Aschol Noshim. Everybody has to stay. And before that, we'll